Hello everyone, Gary here from RCStreetWars and GK Systems Engineering, and today we're talking about the HOBBYWING Link app, how to tune it, how to set up a brand new speed controller. We'll go through the parameters and pretty much everything that you need to know. Now I'm going to say my preferred method is using this device right here. This is the OTA, or the over-the-air programmer, and this is Bluetooth. What's nice about Bluetooth is your iPad or tablet or whatever device you're having can still be connected to Wi-Fi. Therefore, as soon as you open up your app, if there is any app updates, things like that, and you're connected to a good Wi-Fi source, it'll just download them, and you don't have to disconnect or move back and forth between different Wi-Fi devices. Plus, your Bluetooth connection is significantly more robust connection. Just works better. So what we're going to do now is I already got it hooked up to a battery. I'm going to power on the speed controller. I get a light. You're going to notice the fan. The models that have a smart fan, the fan will go for a second, turn off. That's normal. It's a smart fan. Your OTA has got a red light. It is ready to connect. Now, this is a brand new OTA, so it still is going to be default. The default password is all 8s. I do recommend remembering the password after you've changed it, but for right now, I'm just going to confirm and log in. Now, at this point is when I like to go to my settings, and I just want to get this done, get it out of the way. For the sake of the video, I'm not going to do this right now, but settings of the Bluetooth module. And here's where you're going to change the name, change the password, all that good stuff. Do something unique. Do it for yourself. That way you can identify yours in the sea of Wi-Fi modules. Who knows wherever you'll be. And no one will accidentally get onto yours by putting in the default password. All right. That being said, let's dive into the speed controller. Now, after I do my Bluetooth settings, and the very next thing I like to do is a firmware update. I want to make sure that I'm working on the most current generation firmware before I put a lot of work into the speed controller, because it's just going to wipe it out. You're going to have to do it over again. So now, for the sake of the video, I've already done my firmware update, but this is what where you would go. You'll see that my target version and my current version are the same. No reason to do it. If you want to check, you can check what your different firmware versions are. All right. Let's dive into the parameters. So when you connect to it, it's going to upload the current parameters. Now, I've already gone ahead and programmed this speed controller for a customer, but we're going to switch profiles and just start with a brand new profile so we can go through it. So you notice when you hit there, you're going to see 0 timing, 1/8 off-road, and drag race. This is mine. I like to put it here just to have these free. So let's go to a 0 timing, and we're going to start from scratch. Now, something to be aware of is anytime you make changes, you hit the save button, it'll save. If you have a really nice tune, okay, you can export it and then re-import it at a later date. Let's say you make some changes, you don't like it, you don't remember what you changed, you just hit import. So in this case, let's say here, I go import, you already see I have a bass. I can click this and it'll import it to there. Import, you see it already changed it over to drag race. Now you're gonna notice that I already have, and it just put it right back to where it was because that was the entire thing. So let's go to a profile and we'll go from there. So running mode, this is the first one, and it is set to forward with brake. I like forward with brake because most racing organizations do not allow reverse anyway. And if you are running reverse, which is fine to do, understand that sometimes if you are moving the brake around on the radio, you could accidentally engage reverse. And in some cases, that could be very bad. So for the most part, I just like forward with brake. If you feel like you need reverse, you can use it, but Definitely, I don't recommend forward and reverse. I'm not even sure why that's there, but it is. So forward with brake for me. Apologize, I'm trying to do this through the camera. Now your max reverse force, again, we're not using reverse. Let's go to 0 timing. Just want to start fresh. Max reverse force, I'm not using reverse, so we don't need to worry about it. My LiPo cells is set to 2. You can have it set to auto, 2, 3, or 4 cells. I already know that I'm only using this particular one on 2 cells, so I'm just going to put it there. Cutoff voltage, ESC thermal protection, and motor thermal protection, you may notice, are disabled. I recommend just starting out with them disabled if you're new, and then turn them on. The reason I say this is what I don't want to see people do is inadvertently have a setting in here that messes up with something that they're doing on the car, and they don't know what it is. So if these are all disabled, okay, you can start turning them on one at a time, and if something happens, you can at least troubleshoot it back to that. Now, I will tell you, for 95% of the applications, you should be using these protections. They're very helpful. They're there to protect the motor, speed control, things like that. But just to eliminate the initial variables, start with them disabled. If you're drag racing, 100% keep them disabled. If you're drag racing, you really should know what you're doing. Pay attention. You should not be running your battery voltage down, and you should not be hot lapping it, getting it too hot. Okay? But if you're not drag racing, you're doing something else, you should be running these. But just to get it running the first time, let's eliminate the variables. Your BEC voltage, this is your battery elimination circuit voltage. This is takes the place of when we used to have battery packs on our cars to power our receiver and servo. Right now it's set to 6 volts. You do have the option of 7.4. This is for high voltage servos, receivers, things that can accept 7.4. The reason you would use this is your servos may be stronger and maybe they work quicker. You may get more torque out of them, so on and so forth. But this will be with compatible servos. It's just safe to run 6.0 unless you really know you want 7.4. Here is your smart fan. Smart fan is enabled. If for some reason you want your fan to run all the time, you would disable it. But HOBBYWING's done a great job with this. Speed controller, leaving it enabled is a good way to go. Sensor mode, fully censored. Now this is the one that trips some people up. HOBBYWING, they will tell you in their manual, if you read any of their literature, things like that, fully censored, full censored with their speed controllers is only recommended when paired with their motor. This will become apparent when we get through this video, but their motors communicate with the speed controller in a certain way that the speed controller takes advantage of the way they do it, the communication protocol, to realize some additional benefits that are in the program and they're just not available with different brands. The motors that, on the other hand, are compatible with any speed controller when you're using the HOBBYWING, especially these new generation speed controllers, the most current ones, they are designed to be paired with a HOBBYWING motor. If you do not pair it with a HOBBYWING motor, it's fine. You will just select this hybrid mode and you're good to go. But because this is going out to customers and you're using it with the new Drag Race 6500 big block, we're fully censored and we're ready to go. Motor rotation, counterclockwise. This is the standard direction in RC. We go counterclockwise. Now, there are some chassis installations and things like that that require the motor to go the other way, clockwise. All right? If you need to do that, here's where you do it. You will not, and I repeat, not swap the wires like some people have done on some of the older systems. If you've been into RC for a while, you are not swapping the wires to change the motor direction. It's very bad. Don't do it. These new speed controllers, you are not meant to swap the wires. Now, This is going to lead to something that is going to contradict what I just said, but it's for a different purpose. Here is your AC swap, okay? This is to swap the A and C, but for the only purpose because you've connected it to the motor backwards. And why you would do this is because it makes the wires lay out in a way that's more advantageous for some reason. So in this case, you're going to have the A on the speed controller going to the C on the motor, and the A on the motor going to the C on the speed controller. Instead of going A to A, B to B, C to C, the A's and C's are swapped. That's when you use this. It is not to change the direction of the motor. It's simply to tell the speed controller that for whatever reason, you have taken the A and the C and you've swapped them to the motor, and everything will continue to work normally. Motor rotation is where you change the direction of the motor. Phase AC swap is just because for whatever reason you needed to swap the wires, okay? Throttle rate control is a number that is assigned to the throttle sensitivity. It's essentially a quickness to the throttle that changes the feel of the car. Now, I will tell you, these HOBBYWING speed controllers are very powerful, as most speed controllers are very powerful, and most people tend to overuse this number. I'm going to tell you for what I do, I like a number of between 4 and 5. Sometimes I start at 1 and I just work my way up until I'm happy. The only time I ever find myself maxing this thing out is when I'm using a very, very small motor. What I mean by small is a very high turn motor, a 21.5, a 25.5, maybe even a 17.5, and it just has no power, and I'm not very sensitive with the throttle. I'm being very aggressive with the throttle because the motor needs all the help it can get. But if you have a powerful motor, a mod motor, a drag racing motor, things like that, start at 1. All right. Honestly, you're not going to know what 1 does until you try it. So start at 1. I already know from my setup from testing that 3 to 4, 5 maybe is pretty good. But if you're new, just start at 1. It's going to help you out. And then do this one at a time, see how it feels. Throttle curve. This is the big one, guys, especially if we're drag racing, but it's useful for a lot of things. I think the throttle curve is underutilized by a lot of people. Let's talk about it. So you see here right now it's set to linear. Linear is pretty standard, just a straight line. We're going to go to customized. Now you see when we are customized, okay, it starts out as a straight line. What does all of this mean? Well, the bottom is the throttle position. This is the input from the radio. Remember, the radio is outputting a signal and the speed controller is receiving it as an input. These are the inputs, 25%, 50, 75, 100, so on and so forth. But there's nothing saying that the motor power output has to be 1-to-1. Does not have to be. Matter of fact, there's a lot that we can do by manipulating this curve. So for instance, let's say that we want a little bit more torque at 50% throttle. Maybe we even want a little bit more torque over here, over here. You see, there's all kinds of things that we can do. And at the same time, maybe we like this ramp, but maybe it's a little too aggressive here. Well, let's just knock it down a little bit here. And we can change the way this is. Now, again, this is not a curve that I'm saying you should use. This is just an example, but it's an example of maybe the way you want to think about it. Now, this is going to tie into something we're going to talk about in a minute. So for the sake of this video, we're just going to leave it right here. Now, you see, this is pretty aggressive at 50% throttle. We're, more than 60% motor power. And then, by 75%, we're almost at 100. But let's just pretend that our drag car can use this, all right? And this is I think it's a pretty smooth looking curve. So we're going to confirm and save it, all right? So it's there. Now, our neutral range, this essentially is the amount of play in your radio before it goes into the power curve. So essentially, how much play is in the radio before it clicks over. I personally like 4%. I've tried 3%. 3% is just too edgy. I think just even resting your finger on the trigger can move the car. But I think if you're just gentle, you can put your finger on the trigger at 4% and the car won't move. And then the very instant you put any pressure on the trigger, it starts moving. But it's not saying that you need to use that. If you're doing a different kind of racing that needs a smoother application, or maybe it's a very high power motor on a very loose off-road track or something, you might want 7, 8, 9, 10%. I don't know. 6% is the default for drag racing. For my personal taste, I like 4, but that is a personal thing. Initial throttle force is exactly what it means. How much force will be initially applied before it moves over to the throttle curve. So this is, you just cracked neutral from your neutral range. How much is it kicking the motor? Now, any of you may have watched my reel on the new HOBBYWING drag motors. They start very easy. They do not need a lot of power to start. They start very easy. I have no problem starting that motor at 6%. So, but for drag racing, I'm going to kick this up to 10 to 15%, and that's just the amount of crack. Now, I will say, because I already hear some people, what if I need more than that? Well, it's very simple. You need more than that, okay? You go here to your customized, and you will raise these points, and you're going to use the point on your radio. Remember, guys, when we're doing radio tuning, that's a different topic. Point is going to shoot over to some percentage, and then we're going to have some throttle delay, right? So we may shoot up to here, right? We may use a point that shoots up to here, and then we go on some delay. And this curve may be a curve that we like. I don't know. These are just the possibilities. All right, maybe we want more. All right, maybe we want to shoot up to here and use that kind of curve. These are all possibilities. So you know what? Actually, I'm going to leave this curve and get to something that I'm going to talk about that's nice on this speed controller. All right. So that's our initial throttle force. And then here is coast. What coast is a small amount of power that's applied to the motor so that the motor has no braking effect. If you imagine, even if you put it in neutral, if you ever tried to turn your motor by hand, it has some resistance because the magnets have some resistance. So that resistance acts as a very, very small light drag on your drivetrain. Now, there may be some racing classes or things that happen in your driving style that you do not need that little bit of drag because maybe it's making the car pushy or it's doing something that you don't like and you just want it to be free, like as if you were in neutral. Well, that's what you use here. You would just apply some coast amount. This is just some very light amount of power that's applied during neutral, and it is there to essentially just keep the motor from, sorry about that, guys. Just keep the motor from dragging down, okay? Now, this is what I was alluding to. Softening value and softening range. Softening value and softening, this is the opposite of timing. It is like retarding timing, okay? Softening value, you see, we have a degree, it's all in degrees. So just like a full-size car or electronic fuel injection or even the N-bell timing on your can, you can use timing retard to knock that down. This is very advantageous because it may allow you to adjust your motor N-bell to some number that is going to be advantageous on the top end and then just knock it down here. Now, we also have a softening range, and this is the range that this is going to apply up to. Over this range, it will essentially go away. So if I had a softening value of 16 and a softening range of 45, okay, it is going to, from 0 to 45% throttle, it will be reducing timing. And as we get closer to that number, that's going to bleed off, all right? So if we like this curve, let's just say this is a very smooth curve and it's here, and for whatever reason, we can't really get something that we like because of how it moves, and we want to use some softening, we can do it here. Remember, it's also the equivalent of just knocking back your end bell, which a lot of people do. So tons of positive benefits to softening value and softening range. Again, do I think you should start there? No, I think that, you start at 0 and use it as applied. Something I'm going to just inject in here. When you're tuning, you should always be asking, what is it that I need? I think a lot of people, and I know because a lot of people call me for advice, they're trying to put something in their speed controller that they think they want, but they don't really know that they need it. And I think that you should always identify what you need and then start thinking about how to get there. So think about what you need. And if it's like, I need a little bit less in this area, well, this may be a good way of doing it. RPM limit. This sounds exactly like it is. This is a global rev limit that will not allow the motor to rev past a particular RPM. So just as I've said before, and this is going to be a recurring theme, when you're starting out, turn this off, okay? Let's not have something interfering with your initial setup tuning. Let's understand what we need. If we need an RPM limit, let's use it. If we don't, maybe we don't need it. Brake force, max brake force, brake rate control. These are all your braking parameters. Now, here we have drag, brake, force. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is not the coast. This is the amount of brake that will be dragging when you apply neutral. So when you let go of the throttle, the speed controller may apply whatever number you put here. So let's say you put 10%. That is a immediate 10% of braking power right at neutral. So the motor is going to be dragging with about 10% braking force. This is actually quite useful because if you have a scenario where you need to balance the car and get off the throttle and balance the car before you apply the brakes, a little bit of drag brake goes a long way because you let off, and as soon as you let off, it's already starting to apply a little bit of braking, helps stabilize the car, and then you go. Max brake force, also exactly what it sounds. It's the maximum percentage of braking power that can be applied. I recommend personally just running this at 100 and then move it to what you need. I'd rather have a little bit more and play with it than be capped at something less. And then all of a sudden you've done all this brake tuning and then you realize, oh, Jesus, I need more brake, and it messes up your tuning. Start with 100, knock it down if you need to, but drag brake force is definitely a good thing. Don't get carried away with that. Just a little bit goes a long way. Your brake rate control is very similar to your throttle rate control. This you can be a little bit more aggressive with initially because just the way the brakes are working. But same thing, I like to start with it low and then work up with it, especially for a drag car. I'm gonna say, guys, we're going 100 miles an hour. We're slamming on the brakes. We do not have a lot of precision in our brakes. This isn't like an on-road car or somewhere we're just playing with them. We're going full on and slowing down the rate of change that's happening with your finger is going to help you just stabilize the car. Turn that up slowly, see how it works. Now, here are some really nice ones. Your brake control strategy. You see something here that says traditional, which traditionally HOBBYWING speed controllers have had the best brakes in the industry. I don't know anyone who's been using HOBBYWING speed controllers for any period of time in any form of racing, on-road, off-road, whatever, that never said the brakes are awesome. They've gone even a step further and now added something called disc brake feature. Now, this does not mean you're using a disc brake. It means it acts similar to how the brakes on a race car work. And again, remember how I said the HOBBYWING speed controllers need a HOBBYWING motor. That's because there's more things that are happening in the communication than just the sensor timing. Here, this ABS force, what does this mean? Well, this ABS force is a form of ABS, okay? And it works by sensing when the motor is starting to lock up. So you're on the brakes really hard and the wheels lock. Well, when the wheels lock, it's a direct drive connection, the motor locks. When this senses the motor is starting to lock, it will go into an ABS type strategy where it'll back off the brakes and then apply whatever amount you put here, 10, 20. So this is a way of, you can get on the brakes and then just as it's starting to lock, it'll free up, apply 9%, free up 9, until it sees that the motor is starting to rotate normally, and then it'll go back to the normal brake strategy, okay? This is a tremendously useful feature. It works so well. It makes your brakes so smooth in more than just one form of racing, so many different forms of racing that you're going to use a speed controller. But this ABS force only works with disc brake. So disc brake, ABS force, use it. I recommend it. This disc brake curvature is a very similar kind of concept to Expo, in my opinion. I just leave it at neutral, 0, sorry. If I want some kind of brake Expo, I'll do that in my radio. But if you don't have a radio that's smart enough, or it's maybe lacking some of the features you might want, you can do that here. Brake frequency, okay? Oh, you know what? Did we? We did. Okay. I'm sorry, guys. We skipped PWM, drive frequency. Let's talk about that now because it ties into our brake frequency. I'm sorry. I think I noticed I skipped it. Well, you may have a lot of people talk about PWM, drive frequency. What is it? What does it do? Well, this is the frequency of power that's being applied to the motor while it's in the drive or run positions, whether that's under braking or forward power. Well, what does this mean? Well, you may have heard that lower numbers are more aggressive, while higher numbers are smoother. Well, why is that? What does that do? What does it even mean? Well, I prepared a visual representation for you. That being said, for drag racing, I like to start at 6. If I was doing something that had no power, like a 21.5 or 72K, I really want it to be as aggressive as I can because the motor's already. But a mod motor, something that's in a buggy, maybe I'm going to do 8. For drag racing, I kind of like 6. I think I'm in between 6 and 8, depending on the condition, but let's just leave it on 6. Let's talk about what it is. Well, I prepared here a drawing, and I'm going to just zoom out a little bit to see if we can see it a little bit better. Okay, here we go. All right, guys, I'm trying to... Now, we see here that we have some low frequency and some high frequency, okay? And you'll notice that, here we go, sorry about that. So, we have a low frequency, we have a high frequency. The low frequency are like those small numbers, 2K, 3K, 4K. Your high frequency is like your big numbers, 12, 16, 24, 32. But what is it, all right? Well, we need to understand that one cycle, 1 hertz, is always going to be a cycle of frequency in 1 second. That's 1 hertz, 1 cycle, 1 second. So we are fixed in this block of time. How many cycles, right, or what is our frequency in one unit of time, 1 second? Well, you see here, to fit big blocks, right? This is a really big on followed by an off, really big on followed by an off, like that. We just can't get as many of them in there. In this particular example, I got 1, 2, 3.5, all right, in 1 cycle, but they're big blocks. So really big on, it hits really hard, off, hits really hard, off, hits really hard, off, and then it moves over. Now we go to a high frequency. It's just more of them. It's a higher number. So to fit more of them in the same block of time, they have to get smaller. So we have an on, off, like this. Now this is a very simplified diagram, but I think it proves a point. So what does this do? Why is it smoother? Well, the high frequency is similar to moving this paper or this notepad like that. Very gentle, but I'm doing it quickly. The low frequency is very hard hits. Now, make no mistake, the lowest frequency you can get away with, it ultimately will be better because it produces less heat, it's more efficient, it's easier on the motor, but it is very aggressive. Now, that does not mean you run the lowest frequency that's on the speed controller. It's the lowest you can get away with. So if you get away with 8, you run 8. If you get away with 6, you run 6. If you get away with 12, and you run 12, right? It's really going to be determined by the setup of your car, how much grip you have, and what kind of motor you're running. But remember, the low frequency are these big, hard hits, followed by a short period of off. The high frequency, the hits, it's all the same power, but the duration, right? Because it's a frequency. How many times can we do it? Okay, high frequency, we're hitting more in the same unit of time. Low frequency, less, but we're hitting it harder and longer while we're on it, all right? That's frequency. Again, you want, ultimately, I've made the most power. Every time I've dropped frequency on the dynamometer, I've made more power, but it doesn't translate to something that is always available to be used on the track. Just because I can run a low frequency on the dyno, it's not applicable on the track. And I'm going to tell you, use a higher frequency to start, work your way down. I really think starting somewhere around 12 is kind of a good place, maybe 16, somewhere around there. I think I would avoid very, very high frequencies as it can produce a lot of heat in the speed controller, but somewhere in the middle, like 16 to 12 is a good place. And then just slowly work your way down, see how your car handles and what your lap times or ET is. All right, let's get back to the tuning parameters. One second, get this unlocked. All right, now we're back. And let's zoom in again. So we covered the drive frequency, and it is the same for the brake frequency, okay? It is how the brakes are going to be applied. Now, let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, timing, okay? I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit more. There we go. Now, I may have said this earlier, but across the board, HOBBYWING speed controllers all have very similar parameters, small differences between different models, but generally as you get to the Z-Run, the professional racing series, you're going to find that they're pretty much the same parameters and they tune pretty much the same. As you get to the easy run, a quick run, you're going to find just a little bit of these parameters are going to be removed, and it's just for what is applicable for the purpose of that product. But the professional series is going to have the most tuning. Now, for this particular Speedo, the boost timing is a little bit different than what you may be accustomed to. The boost timing is a global number, okay? Let's pick this one, 12. It is a global number that the speed controller will intelligently apply. And what it does is it intelligently applies it to keep the motor accelerating. It can sense, again, why it has to be paired with the HOBBYWING motor. It can sense the acceleration of the motor, and it says this is how much timing I have to play with, and it will look to keep the motor accelerating, especially based on what it's seeing, the input from the radio. If it's seeing the radio is saying, hey, I want a lot of power, it will do this. But this ties back into, very circular, guys, your throttle rate control. All right, let's go to the curve, customized. All right, now you see here, you know, we left it here. Now, this is not anything I would tell you to run, but let's just pretend. It's saying I want this much power. and the radio is here, and it sees that the motor is slowing down. So it says, oh, I got some boost to play with. Let me start applying the boost, or remove, apply, to try to meet this power level. I'm going to tell you, I have never beat this strategy with low throttle and lots of boost timing. When I give it more in the throttle curve, I always make more power on the dyno than if I was to bring this down to something like this and try to apply a lot of boost timing. This, pumping up the throttle curve on the dyno and using less boost and letting the speedo figure out, has always won, always won. So I recommend trying to do more with the throttle curve. Keep your boost low, okay? Let the ESC do its job by figuring out, and this is a global number, all right? That's gonna then lead you into turbo timing. Turbo timing is important because, let's just say a number like 30. Turbo timing is important because at this point, we've already reached our maximum torque requested output. We're at full throttle. What we are saying is, give us every bit of performance that the motor has available. Well, how do we get more than 100%? We do it by adding timing. So once we've gotten everything out of the motor and we're asking for maximum load, we start feeding in timing, all right? Now, what the turbo timing is going to do is, when you look at the current draw, you'll see that your throttle will go up, your RPM go up, and your current's going to be high, but then the current's going to start to drop off. Where the current starts dropping off, that's a good indication of where you need to start adding your turbo timing and how much turbo timing, and then that moves into the turbo delay. How much delay you have is going to say, okay, we reached full throttle here, right? And then we're holding full throttle. Our current is still really high, but then the current starts to kind of drop off over here. Well, we don't need to add timing right here where the current's still high. We can delay it just a little bit. We maybe just before it's starting to drop, we want to start it, and we want to look to start picking up this current and keeping the motor accelerating. That's how we use turbo timing. Because by that point, the speed controller is like, hey, I've given it all I can give it. Now we need to pump it up, and that's what turbo timing does. We do that with the turbo delay to get it at the right time. All right, let's talk about the turbo increase rate. The turbo increase rate is how many degrees for every 1/10 of a second will be applied. Now, let's just do a simple number. Let's make this 36. Okay. And let's make, let's make this 6. We see here, we have 36 degrees of maximum turbo timing. And our turbo increase rate is 6 degrees every 1/10 of a second. What does that mean? It means that it will apply 6 degrees every 1/10 of a second, and it will take a total of 6/10 of a second to get to 36 degrees, right? Because 6 times 6 is 36. So 6 times 1/10, 6/10. There you go. Now, if you add that to your turbo delay of 2/10, you are now all in 8/10 of a second after full throttle. Does that make sense? So we hit full throttle. As soon as we hit full throttle, it starts looking at the delay. It counts 1/10, 2/10. Now it starts 6 degrees, 6 degrees, 60, till it gets to 36, and it stops applying because it reached its turbo value. All right. Now your turbo decrease rate is exactly that. It's how fast will it bleed off your turbo. Now, I'm going to tell you, there is a couple ways of using this. If you are drag racing, I recommend using it at the slowest. Why? Because every time you come off the throttle, this will take a little bit longer to bleed off your turbo. Now, if you come off and have to get back on again, you didn't lose all that much. If you set this to instant, okay, set this to instant, the very instant you come off the throttle, all your turbo's gone. And you got to build it all back up again. All right. But, and this is the big but, if you're doing something different, you're on-road racing, off-road racing, having turbo timing is going to affect your braking, because now the way your brake control works is going to be affected by the timing, and you don't have the same kind of braking, you don't have the same kind of braking response, braking performance. So braking is affected by the turbo decrease rate. If you're doing something where braking is important, I would not set this very slow, but I would start somewhere in the higher spectrum. Matter of fact, there's almost no reason not to have it instant, because let's just say you were on-road racing or off-road racing and you're full throttle and you come off the throttle, get on the brakes to go into a corner. Well, you're going into a corner and now you're going to start to apply some throttle at the entry and then apex and then exit. You don't need all that turbo messing you up. So, but if you drag racing, go the slowest that you can. Now you're going to see here, there's some data numbers. This is just generic, very simple values that's from the speed controller. All the data is stored on your OTA right here, and it's recalled by your OTA, all right? Once you have downloaded it from your OTA, it'll go into a file, and it'll be saved on your laptop or your device, and you can review it at any time, all right? So how we do that is we go to settings. Oh, I'm sorry. We go to data log, and we're going to see real-time data. This is what we want. Now, here is, I'm going to just stop for a second. I did a quick reel earlier where I showed the HOBBYWING Tunalizer hooked up to a speed controller. This is a great screen to give you this is like real-time telemetry. You can watch all this move. So if you had your Tunalizer hooked up to it and you were moving your throttle and you want to see what some of your values were based on some of the changes you were making, you can do it in the screen. Super helpful. This is a real-time screen. If you wanted to see what your mile per hour would be, okay, you just change this over from RPM to mile an hour, and I'll tell you what your mile an hour is. So remember, we had these settings. We put our gear ratio, our motor pole, and our wheel size diameter in millimeters, and we have a unit selection mile per hour, right? That's what's happening here, guys. We want to know what RPM we're producing, what mile an hour. We do this here, real-time data, super easy to do with the Tunalizer. But, okay, we want to look at data. We go to history, and we have from OTA or from file. Now, if you have not downloaded it before, the first thing you're going to do is from OTA. And you're going to see here, it just has one because we just hooked this up for the first time. All this really is just the startup data. There's nothing there. But if I go back here, history from file, here's where it's really nice, okay? All of your data is stamped with your name, whatever, and the date and time. All right, the date and time is super handy because now you can go back, and if you're keeping notes, you know exactly what date, what approximate time, if you did 3 runs that day or 5 runs, and it's the first one, second one, third one, fourth one, whatever it is, you can just look at the timestamp. To view it, you just hit view, you select one, you hit view, and now I'm going to tell you on the iPad, this does work sideways, so I'm going to turn it like this, but it's very similar to maybe some things you've seen. You just use your finger and you scroll and you have your RPM, throttle position, voltage, current thing. Now, this was an older model. Speed control did not have current, so current's blank, but this one does have current. But remember, this is from 2022. This is 4 years old. So this has been out for a while. This is a 2022, but you can see here, you can see my battery voltage, my RPM. One thing to note about this HOBBYWING data logger, it is a high-speed data logger. It picks up much smaller imperfections. It's probably going to be look a little noisier than what you're seeing because there's very less filtering because it's more samples per second. Now, I can tell you this was on a bumpy, dirty road, and it wasn't the greatest of run, but this is just an example of it picks up all the little fluctuations. Very, very nice data logger on this, and you have everything you need. So there you go. And that's it, everyone. I don't think I have any more for you. Please feel free to drop us a line at RCStreetWars.com under the contact section. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff. And if you have any questions at any time, please drop us a line, send me an email. I'm happy to answer them. I hope this was a helpful video to you guys, and I'll see you guys at the races. Thank you guys very much.